All right, welcome everybody. Today I am really proud to be talking to an author I've been reading for well over 10 years, about 14 years. Uh, Today I'm talking to Eric S. Brown. Eric, do you mind giving yourself a short, not a short, my brain is all foggy this morning. Can you give us an introduction to yourself, please?
Gosh, I'm a guy who grew up reading and collecting comic books and loving horror, who decided to start writing over 2 decades ago, and I've been doing it ever since. Um, I've written a lot of books and a lot of short stories for a lot of different places.
You certainly have, and we're going to be talking about your writing habit in just a little bit, but first I want to break the ice a little bit. First of all, I just want to thank you, my good friend, for blurbing my book that comes out tomorrow, and that's the blurb right there. I was really pleased that you said yes and excited because I didn't expect you to say yes, but then you were like, "Yeah, sure, send it along." And that really
Well, it was a really
made
good
my day.
book, so I mean, it deserved a blurb, regardless. I enjoyed it. So,
Well, thank you. Now, just before we came online here, we were talking about so I didn't even add these into my questions when we've interacted a couple of times before this, and that's why I contacted you for the blurb. One was for an anthology I don't think actually made it to press, but the second was for another anthology that you accepted my story for, and that was for the Chud Lives anthology. And I find it funny that I didn't add any questions on. I wasn't even thinking of this because I think I wanted to focus mostly on your career, but when you mentioned it, I was like, "Oh my god, how did I not do that?"
yeah, I mean, it was a passion project for me in Crystal Lake Publishing. I grew up loving that movie, and when we ended up getting the rights to do the book, I just went after the coolest stories I could find, yours included. And yeah, we got people like David Drake and David Robbins and a huge assortment of great writers in that book.
Yeah, that was really fun to write for. As I was saying before we went live here, I saw the submissions for it, and I got really excited because I really love the movie. And I was wondering, like, how did you come up with this idea to do this anthology? Because you don't see this type of thing very often.
Oh gosh. Well, it was a universe that I really felt like there needed to be more of, because Chud 2, Bud the Chud just does not count. It's not the same
Yeah.
kind of movie at all. And there really wasn't a lot of merchandise out there for Chud at the time I was doing it. There's still not a lot now either, but there's a little more. And being a avid collector, I really wanted more out there. So Crystal Lake and I got in touch with Andrew Boname. Hopefully, I'm saying his name correctly, the producer, and he gave us the rights to a one-time tribute anthology, and we just rolled with it from there.
That's really awesome. And from my understanding, 'cause there was a Facebook group, I believe, and we were given information. They were pretty enthusiastic about this project, weren't they?
I believe so. Joe handled all I did was pick the stories. Joe over at Crystal Lake handled everything else. So I just got to read through a bunch of Chud themed stories and pick the best ones. Other than helping track down the rights originally, that was about the extent of my involvement.
Did
And
you get a lot of submissions for it?
yes, there were a lot of submissions for it. It was not a small slush pile to go through, but thankfully, most of the stories were already in place where I had went out and tracked down people like I'm going to butcher his name, Tim Wagner, who
Mm,
worked on Supernatural,
yeah.
and I think Crystal Lake actually got Jonathan Mayberry to be in it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Jonathan and I used to know each other pretty well back in the day, but we kind of drifted apart. But Joe asked him, and he did a story for it.
Yeah.
So
There's also, yeah, there's quite the, Chad Lutsky, R. Baxter. Yeah, there's yeah, Tim Wagoner. I remember reading this and I loved the stories in here. And I want to thank you again for accepting my story. And here's the cover again for the video. Um, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, so moving on. Oh, before we move on, I'm just wondering, is there any other movie that you would love to write? Maybe do something like this and again.
Oh gosh, that is a really rough
I have
question.
a hint here of what I would like. The
Yeah,
Thing.
if I could pick any film to expand the universe of, and a lot of people will probably laugh at this, I would pick Toby Hooper's Life Force.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
that's an interesting
I
choice. I like that film.
love that film. The book by Colin Wilson, The Space Vampires, is not one of my favorites, but what Hooper did with the movie was fantastic.
Yeah.
That
That that
would probably be the one.
that's an interesting choice. I like that movie too.
Now, if we were going expanding other people's universes in general, I would definitely take Brian Lumley's Necroscope
Oh,
because
yeah.
I am a huge psionics fan. Psionics, that's the character class I always played in Dungeons and Dragons back when they existed in Dungeons and Dragons. But
Hmm.
psionic powers are just like my jam. Uh, but his wife has made it very clear that nobody is touching Necroscope ever because, Brian passed away very sadly at the beginning of the
Yeah.
year. And the film rights are already optioned by Morgan Freeman's production company. They just haven't done anything with it yet. But yeah, that would be my second choice.
That's actually pretty awesome. I met Brian Lumley at the World Horror Convention when it was in Toronto, I think back in 2007. And I shook hands with him. I got him to sign a couple of books. And then I used to smoke back then. I've been smoke free for 15 years now, but I was outside having a smoke and he came out to have a smoke and he was like, make sure you don't tell my wife. and then,
Oh, that's
and then he,
hilarious.
he was pacing back and forth smoking, and I'm just staring at him, I guess, wondering what he was doing. And he looked at me and he was like trying to work out a story idea in my head. And then he kept pacing back and forth. That
Well,
was
I am
awesome.
jealous. I would love to have met Brian Lumley before he passed away for sure.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So speaking of him, uh, who were your literary heroes growing up?
Whew. Brian Lumley is in the top five.
I had a feeling.
David Robbins. A lot of people don't know him. Probably he wrote a post-apocalyptic series for, I think, for leisure called End World. I grew
Okay.
up on those books. Love David Robin. He's written all kinds of stuff. I think he's up to like 400 or 500 books that he's done. He did the novelizations for Proof of Life and some Cuba Gooding Jr. Men of Honor. Very famous writer in his own way. H.P. Lovecraft, of course. Despite him not being the world's greatest human being, he is definitely a visionary artist who kind of set everything for the people who came after him. And biggest of all is David Drake. He passed away earlier at the end of last year, early this year too. He was my mentor from way early on in my career. He had pretty much gotten to the point where he was like a father figure to me. I loved him very much. He was a great guy, and I learned how to write a lot of the action that I write from reading his book as a kid, like his
Nice.
works. So we
Is
got
there
to meet.
sorry, go ahead.
I was saying we got to meet. There's a Bain Books does a commission every year in Chattanooga called Liberty Con,
Mhm.
and you know, it was the first time I ever met him. I was wearing flash socks, a flash shirt, and he was wearing flash socks. And there was this huge group of like military sci-fi horror fans who had gathered around us because they knew we were going to meet for the first time, and everybody got a kick out of the fact that his shirt and my shirt and his socks matched. It was kind of hilarious.
Yeah, that is funny. That makes me think, I've read, uh, quite a bit not quite a bit, but a few interviews of, that you've, held over the years, and you were quite into comic books growing up as well, weren't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I collected like a maniac till the summer of 2023. I so I have a second house where it's just pretty much comic books.
Oh, wow.
But it had a humidity event in the summer of 2023 and did about
Mm.
tens of thousands of dollars of damage that was not
Oh,
covered
no.
by homeowners, and I did not have a collector's insurance policy.
That's
So it was a
awful.
very rough emotional time for me.
That
So
would be.
I have actually been selling my collection since then in bits and pieces here and there. And for a while, I've been a collector since I was 4, so I wanted to collect something. So I floundered around doing Battlestar Galactica stuff for a while. And then this year I settled into vintage horror paperbacks. dang you, Grady Hendrix. But yes, so I'm a paperbacks from hell collector now.
Oh,
Very
nice.
specifically, chapter 3, when animals attack. That's like my niche.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about that briefly, and we might, who knows, we might be doing a show about animal attacks in the future, correct?
That would be fun. I could break
Yeah.
out my copy of David Ann's The Folly, and we could just go from there.
uh, so, what is there any book specifically or author that made you think I have to do this myself? I have to become a writer?
Overall, David Drake and David Robbins both played into that a lot. Reading, because David Drake used his military science fiction as a way to cope with his PTSD after Vietnam.
Hmm.
And David Robbins just had a lot of fun and had a lot of spiritual elements with his End World series. And growing up reading those action books, I thought, well, hey, I can do this. And then I read The Keep by F. Paul Wilson.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, this is the greatest book ever written in the history of horror literature. I don't think I can ever be this good, but man, I want to try and aspire to that level at some point. So between the three of those guys and growing up on comics and Fangoria, I just started doing it. And my very first short story, I sent it out and it like shotgun effect. I subbed it everywhere I could. And I got 2 acceptance letters on the same day, one from a little magazine called Black Petals, ran by a guy named Kenny Christ, and another by Burning Sky magazine. I'm going to butcher his name, but Greg Gaffon.
Oh, yeah, Greg Giffion,
Yeah,
I
he
think.
was the
Yeah,
editor of that.
very nice.
So I gave it to Greg and promised Black Petals I would write them a second story. So I wrote them a military sci-fi story, I think, as my second story, and that was the beginning of my career right there. Um,
Sweet.
so it's
Yeah,
back-to-back acceptances, which is very rare, but
fun,
feel
funny.
blessed that it happened.
Yeah, very. A funny story. Greg Giffion was my very first guest, like over 10 years ago now, when I was doing the Darkness Dwells podcast. And it was absolutely awful. But it's no longer available, thank goodness. But yeah, he was my very first guest. I reached out to him and he was like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
He was very encouraging. I mean, he was the first editor who really took an interest and said, "Hey, kid, you got something. You need to be doing this." So if it hadn't been for him, things might have been a little different in the beginning.
Nice. Now, I found you through your Bigfoot War series. I remember reveling in just how gory and fun they were to read. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what it is about gore that appeals to some people like you and me.
Whew, I have no earthly idea. It's fun to write. I've never
Yeah,
been
it is.
military, but my father figure David Drake was military. I wanted to be military when I was like 17, 18. I took the ASFAB, but back then they didn't have the technology they have today, and my eyesight was bad. So they're like, you can't fly helicopters. So I was out. I was like,
Yeah,
I don't care. Yeah, I'm not joining if I can't fly.
yeah.
Um, but I guess what I'm trying to say with that is I always liked writing action, and gore is just a part of the action. And never having experienced it in real life, it's a lot easier to write about, I'm sure. And growing up, with reading Fangoria magazine and all the horror that I did, I already had the background on how to enjoy gore and write gore. Uh,
Hmm.
but as to why it is it appeals to people, I have no idea. But clearly it does. The Terrifier film series alone proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. Have you seen Terrifier 3 yet?
I have not seen Terrifier 3. My son is a big art fan, but
Mm.
nowhere in our area has the Terrifier 3 on the big screen
Oh,
right now.
yeah. I went and saw it last weekend. And it is I wouldn't say the worst one yet. Have you seen the others?
Yeah, I enjoyed
Number
1
1
and
and 2?
2. People will probably hate me. I didn't like the more mystical elements they added to the end of 2 with the almost Wonder Woman-esque costume.
Yeah.
I mean, if you saw Wonder Woman 2 and you've seen Terrifier 2, you kind of see the wing gold sword overlap a little bit in the costume, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
But it I think it's better, it's the best one so far, part 3 is. Um, it definitely it's not, like, more gory than part 2, but it is, more spread out, and there's a lot more of it, and
yeah, I heard there was a lot better characterization too, since they spent the time to build up the characters in 2.
Yeah, it's like definitely building on like a lore and characterization, but the gore is still like ever present. The showers, when you go see it, when you do see it, just remember the shower scene. It's something else.
Okay.
It just doesn't stop. Sorry about that. So getting back to Bigfoot here, you've written a lot of like Bigfoot stories,
Yeah,
and
Bigfoot paid the bills for me for a long time. I won't lie.
is it is that one reason why you keep going back to writing about them, or do you revel in it? Do you have a lot of fun with Bigfoot?
It's I hate to be the terrible person who says it's the money, but I've got bills to pay, so
Hmm.
Sasquatch is the way to go. Now, when I started out, the first Bigfoot War sat around for like 8 months on the market with people scratching their heads, wondering what the heck is this, and then all of a sudden it took off and it spawned like a dozen sequels, a fan magazine, several
Yeah.
anthologies. Origin Releasing bought the movie rights and made a terrible film. Uh, C. Thomas Howell and Judd Nelson were fine in it, but that movie it was not the book. There was no
Yeah.
relation to the book. And that when the movie came out, it hurt my career for a while because I really hated the movie, and I think a lot of people did. So it took
Yeah.
me a while to get back into the Sasquatch zone of being able to write that kind of fiction. But I experimented with kaiju and military SF and a few other things in between where the original Bigfoot Pays the Bill ended and the new Bigfoot Pays the Bill began. Um, but since then, I think I've done some decent Bigfoot books. The one I'm most proud of is Manhunt. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
read that one yet, but it is heavy, heavy Terrifier level gore. Um, people's eyeballs being plucked out. And basically, the premise is there's a serial killer who escapes in transit and he ends up in the woods where there's also a killer Sasquatch. So you kind of have this human evil and animal evil running around the woods at the same time.
Yeah. um, is is Bigfoot War still popular today? Does it still have a similar fandom that it did back in when you were publishing them?
Oh gosh, I try people. I still get emails about it and Facebook messages about it from time to time, but I think it's died down a lot from the fan magazine era when people were sending me like original artwork and all that stuff.
That must have been pretty incredible
Oh
experience
yeah,
yourself.
it really was. There was one very sweet fan who sent me a whole bunch of custom Bigfoot artwork, and another guy in Texas sent me a Bigfoot T-shirt that he
Oh,
had
nice.
handmade, and I was like, "Wow, that's impressive." Super nice guy. But,
Yeah. Um, so, excuse me here. How would you say you have progressed as a writer over the past 20 years?
well, that's interesting. I'm still just a big kid with a keyboard. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that my work has gotten any deeper. Um, it's still just fun for me. I just try and have fun with it, make sure the bills are paid, and tell a decent story. So I'm not a guy who outlines. I'm very much a seat of my pants kind of writer who just makes it up as I go along. And I think that adds to the speed and pacing of the book sometimes. It makes it really feel like an adventure rather than a great literary work. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with great literary works, but
It's yeah, you know what? I like
sometimes you
reading
just
for
want that
fun.
pulpy 80s style fun stuff.
Yeah. I struggled for a long time in my own writing trying to write that serious sort of tone. And I found that I can do it, but it's not nearly as much fun as writing the more pulpy, fun, gory type stuff. And I think that's going forward. I think I'm going to probably focus mostly on that myself.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, a lot of people just assume that I think Bigfoot War is the best book I've ever written because of all the financial and movie success that came with Bigfoot War. But if I had to pick any book out of my entire catalog of like 120 books I've written over the past 2 decades plus, and say this is the definitive Eric S. Brown book, I would say it's Cymex Incorporated. And it's about a paramilitary organization of monster hunters who end up caught in a war with an awakening vampire god.
Oh,
And
nice.
it has an awesome blurb from Chuck Dixon. If you've heard of Chuck Dixon, he created Bane and Batman. He wrote a
Okay,
lot
yeah.
of Punisher. He created the Birds of Prey. But
Hmm.
for him to blurb it and go, "Hey, this is awesome," that's a big deal for me. And
Awesome.
it was also my very first ever like full length book. I think it's like a 75,000, 85,000 words, which is huge for me.
Yeah. I don't think I've read that one. I think that one slipped. I'm gonna look it up and I'm
Well, if
gonna
you
read
took
it.
Pacific Rim, the movie, and merged it with Brian Lumley's Necroscope, that's about what Cymex Incorporated is.
Awesome. Uh, you mentioned that you write by the seat of your pants, and I actually had a question about that, so I'm gonna hit
Okay.
it now. Have you ever tried outlining at all? Is that something you ever tinkered with?
I have. My mentor, David Drake, he was a big outline guy. And he functioned at a whole other level than me. This was a guy who was taking Latin at a second college for fun while he was studying law. So
Oh.
whole other intellectual level than me.
Yeah.
Dave was fantastic, and he was a big champion of the outlines. But I think I've only tried it once or twice in my career. I wrote a military science fiction book called Homeworld for
Mhm.
Severed Press a long time ago, and I experimented with that, but it just wasn't for me. I like the being able to change direction and go on the fly, you know,
Yeah.
without feeling locked into a certain sequence of events.
Yeah, I tried outlining as well because I was working, in a factory doing 12-hour shifts, and I was just so tired all the time. So I thought outlining would be the way to go, but I don't think it's gonna work for me either, honestly. So you write in a lot of different genres, not just horror. Is there anything genre-wise that you haven't tackled yet, or at least story idea-wise, subgenre, whatever, that you haven't tackled yet, but are still kinda itching to maybe try?
Well, I can tell you, I'm never going to write romance.
Yeah,
um,
that
yeah,
would be interesting, though.
I have ASD. I have some autistic spectrum issues, so I'm not very emotional. So that's why in some of my books the characters probably aren't as deep as they should be, because
Mhm.
I'm very much a black and white kind of guy in real life.
Yeah.
So romance is out. Most real world stuff I find boring, so you'll never find like a yeah, forgive me for saying this, F. Paul Wilson Repairman Jack style novel that doesn't have the supernatural. Now, those books do have supernatural elements, but at the beginning of it, it's more like he's just an 18 type guy going around solving problems, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of a genre I would like to explore, I would kill to be able to write an 80s style animal attacks book.
Mhm.
Something like Dog Kill or The Pack, but those are just so politically incorrect these days that I've yet to find a publisher who's like, yeah, yeah, go ahead, give us some awesome dog gore.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I think most of those books from back then are probably, you know, not politically correct, anymore. I don't think you'd find a lot of them making print
yeah,
too much.
actually, for a while I had canines in my Bigfoot books and Amazon reviews. I would see these people, it's such a great book. They kill the dogs, you know, over
Yeah.
and over. It was like a recurring theme. So now, like in the last couple of Bigfoot books I've written, the dogs live, the humans still die, but the dogs are like, yeah, we're going to run away and it will be fine. But some kind of animal attacks genre is what I would really like to do next if I could find a publisher brave enough to let me do one.
Yeah. It's kinda interesting how much people are against, like, killing the dog in books. Like, I'm I don't like it myself, but I also don't like it when children get killed, but it doesn't, like, make me
Yeah.
throw a book across the room or anything. But there's some people who are, like, they have a lot of anxiety towards this.
Yeah. No, I tell you, I was a dog hater for most of my life. I was a cat
Oh,
person.
really?
And
Okay.
about 2 years ago, my daughter started begging me for a dog. And I finally caved in and we got a dog. And now she says it's my dog because the dog loves me more than her, apparently. And I love the bloody dog. The dog is awesome. Her name's Hope.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not that I hate dogs, it's just I miss that 80s style kind of animal attack stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever read The Blight by Mark Saunders, but that's about killer moths of all things, but that
Oh.
is a freaking fantastic book. I read that thing in one afternoon, not even a whole day. I just sat down with it on a Sunday and went boom because it was so fast paced and just it was dead on everything you would want in an animal attack apocalypse style book.
Who is, The Blight by again? Mark Saunders. I want to write that down because I have not read that one, but it sounds like it's right up my alley.
It's UK and it's kind of rare, so you're probably not going to find a super cheap copy of it, but it is a
Yeah.
fantastic read.
Yeah, I can put it on the list though, and hopefully track down a copy. Now, you are exceptionally, I think you're the most prolific author I've ever talked to. You've written over 120 books now?
Yeah, I stopped counting 120. There was a point in my career where, not even counting side projects, I was doing about 12 books a year.
Oh, wow.
It was insane. Now that I'm older, I'm going on 50, so I've slowed down to 3, 4 books a year, maybe 5 at best. But when I was young and passionate and just tearing into it, I just plowed through them. So
Nice. Do you write every day? And if so, what is your typical word count average after each writing session, or do you even count
I
your
do,
word?
I do. When I have a book under contract, I try Monday through Friday to always do at least 1,000 words. If
Mhm.
I don't, then I have to spend time making it up somewhere because I've got to have my 5,000 words a week. Now, when I was younger and I was doing 12 books a year, I would do 5,000 words in a day.
Wow.
And it was just, people on Facebook were like, whoa, because I post my word counts. But, I've slowed down a lot. It's not that I'm not, I think I've started questioning like all older writers do and going, hey, could I say that better than,
Hmm.
just going out on the paper like I did when I was younger. So that slows you down some. So I just aim for the 1,000 words a day now and
Yeah.
hope that I get more, but if not, I at least have to hit that 1,000.
Well, that's a good mark to reach. I forget who it was who started that. Do 1,000 words a day, but
Probably
it's
Stephen King in his book On Writing. Would be my guess. I seem to
yeah,
recall him saying something about minimum word count in there.
yeah, and I think that's a good goal to reach. One thing I really like about your books is that it seems like no character is safe.
That's
Absolutely no
true.
character.
That's very, very, very true. That goes along with the not having a plot outline, so I can decide, okay, I'm going in a completely different direction. 2/3 of the way through the book, and everything will just change.
Yeah. Do you ever find that you like a character, but suddenly they're in a situation that they can't get out of, and so you're like, "Well, they have to die." And do you ever find yourself, in that situation?
Oh, right off. Let me show you that. We had some kind of like internet glitch there for a second. So, but I think you were asking about running a character into a corner. Yeah, that does happen, and it's terrible to get out of. Sometimes I just have to go back and take them out of the corner, but usually I try and ride around it so I don't have to backtrack.
Do you ever find yourself where, you write a character that you like and they get themselves into a situation where they can't make it out, they're gonna die, and you're like, "Oh, damn. That's sad."
Okay. Yeah, I've had that happen a couple of times. I did an old werewolf series called A Pack of Wolves for
Mm,
Grandma Press back in the day.
I write
And
some of
also
those, yeah.
the Cymex Incorporated series, I've had that happen where there's been a character that I've been personally attached to who, just for the sake of the story, ends up in a bad place. I'm like, okay, I can't get you out of it. Sorry. And yeah, it's sad to continue on without them in the plot, but you just gotta do it sometimes.
Now, one of your more recent books that you've released, is, Cryptid War. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
It's Bigfoot War on the next level. If you took the Bigfoot War book and gave it a heavy dose of cocaine, that's probably Cryptid War right there. Uh, it's an homage to every cryptid horror thing out there. The book has the Mothman, the Jersey Devil, Dogmen, goblins, tiny caimans eating human flesh, giant alligators coming out of sewers. It's got bats attacking helicopters. Anything that you can relate to cryptid is probably in that book somewhere. I think there's even a scene where a Loch Ness monster type creature takes out a nuclear submarine. But I
Yeah.
mean, there's an evil force that kind of awakens, and it causes all the cryptids to just go crazy against humanity. And all across the globe, every cryptid is just tearing through people. And this one military unit and a scientist and a priest realize where the source of the evil is, and they're sent on like an expedition to try and take out the evil before humanity is completely eradicated.
It was really fun to read. I think it was my favorite of the three I've read of yours this year, and
Oh,
I
thank
was
you.
wondering, I didn't, is it something that could be expanded into a series at all? Do you think? I mean, given the end,
Uh,
it was solved, but that doesn't stop it from not coming back or anything.
it could. I've got two other Bigfoot books under contract right now. One's officially under contract. I'm about 2/3 of the way done with it, and it's very much Nightmare on Elm Street meets Bigfoot War kind of thing.
Hmm.
And the one
That would
after
be
it's going to be
interesting.
a much deeper one. It's the one after it. I'm waiting on the contract for. I can't really say a lot about, except that it's Bigfoot too. So at least for the next little while, I'll be stuck in the Bigfoot zone and not be able to go back to the Cryptid War zone.
Mm.
Um, and maybe somebody will see this video and go, "Hey, yeah, that guy. Let's hire him to do an animal attacks book." You know, who knows?
Yeah. Now, one thing I noticed is your battle scenes are very well done, I find. And I was wondering, how do you approach battle scenes? Because the action's always top notch, and it doesn't, as we've already talked about, it doesn't really hide from the nasty stuff.
I owe everything I know about writing action to David Drake. You know, like I said, I grew up reading his stuff. He became a friend, he became a mentor, then became a father figure. So everything I know about action is from David Drake's work. And I think the best way you can learn to write action is read people like David Drake.
Hmm.
I don't have a specific formula. It's kind of intuitive for me because I spent so much intimate time with works like his that it just flows out of me. So I can't tell you exactly how to write it, but the best way to get better at anything in writing is to read what you're writing. Not to the point where you're
Absolutely.
overlapping and stealing other people's ideas. I'm talking specifically about styles and flow and stuff like that. And
If
most writers start off emulating someone else's voice and then kind of transition into their own voice. And that's kind of what happened with me and David Drake.
Yeah, it's sort of like figuring out the equation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and the rhythm. I also read Stomping Ground, and that was a lot of fun too. Can you tell us what that one's about?
Oh, I'm gonna say there's a great flamethrower scene, if I recall correctly. I've written so many Bigfoot books; it's hard for me to keep track, and I sleep in between them, unfortunately. So, but Stomping Ground is kind of like a Sasquatch burial ground that's invaded by this really rich guy who's wanting to build a huge estate there, and things just don't go well for him and his construction crew. It's very much a down to earth, lower scale Sasquatch novel, but it's just full of action. Um,
It is, yeah.
Kind of like The Blight by Mark Saunders is, it's about a guy who's wanting to build all these apartments and they spray the raw pesticides and it causes the moss to mutate. And Stomping Ground is kind of that thing with a much more Native American, indigenous people kind of slant, with the Sasquatch being the indigenous people who are having their land taken away from them by the white industrialists.
Hmm. Yeah. I really enjoyed the beginning when we meet the two hunters and they get their somewhat just desserts. And I was wondering if this is something because I you see it on T-shirts and all that about you you say the wrong thing to me and I'll put you in a novel and I'll kill you. I was wondering if there's anybody in your real life that, or have you ever put somebody in a book just to have them meet a nasty end?
All the time, constantly. They say for comedians, the biggest form of flattery is to make fun of someone. So I tend to kill people all the time, whether it's people I interact with in my daily life or famous writers. You will find all kinds of little in jokes. In fact, the book I'm writing right now, there's a character named Lumley. So I mean, clearly his name's not Brian Lumley, but I mean,
Yeah,
it's my little in joke.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I've done it too, but yeah, I always find like Easter eggs like that a lot of fun. Now, in our we've had some Facebook Messenger conversations over the past few couple of months actually, and you mentioned that not the most fond of one of your books that came out this year, and that's The Dark Relic. Can you tell us what it's about and why you don't think it's your best?
It's a typical jungle adventure kind of book with an expedition going to find ancient ruins. And it's got a very Lovecraftian vibe.
Mhm.
I don't really feel like it went where I wanted it to go as a writer. I had envisioned, I hate to admit it, I wanted to do a killer worm book, and my
Mm.
publisher was kind of like, "Hey, worms don't really sell. Let's plan it more a different way." And
Uh-huh.
so I went the other way with it. There are still some worms in the book. I won't lie, I did work in some worms, but I just don't feel like I'm as good at Lovecraftian suspenseful kind of horror as I am the outright action gore of something like Bigfoot War. So I'm not saying it's a bad book in any form or fashion. I'm just saying it's not me at my best.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, honestly. It was a lot of fun. And it reminded me of like that elevator pitch, sort of like Indiana Jones meets the Predator, but with like Lovecraftian elements in there.
Well, thank you for reading it.
And I really liked that one character, the guy with the knives. He was
Oh
kind of
yes,
spooky.
yeah, I enjoyed him. He had a great opening scene, if I recall.
Yeah, he had a lot of buildup, and he was fun to watch. All right, so one question I like to ask all my guests on here, and I forgot to send this to you as a prep, so I apologize for that. But I was wondering if there are any authors out there who you think is underrated and people need to talk about more often.
Hmm. James Herbert, uh, he's not as well known here in the States as the UK, I don't think. Believe it or not, I did not really know James Herbert at all till this year. I mean, I might have heard his name in passing. I might have read The Rats once when I was a kid, but this year I discovered James Herbert and went down that rabbit hole. And James Herbert is phenomenal. I mean, he
Hmm.
passed away in 2013, but there was a movie adaptation of his book, The Shrine, just recently with Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I think the movie is called The Unholy. But James Herbert is fantastic. I'm not sure he's qualified as underrated, but definitely James Herbert. If you haven't read F. Paul Wilson's The Keep, you owe it to yourself to read The Keep. There is no better horror novel than The Keep. Um,
Yeah.
David Drake, most people know him for military science fiction, but he also wrote horror before he was big into military science fiction. In fact, he once told me about writing a horror story in Nam while there was an ammo dump exploding
Oh
behind him
wow.
while he was writing the story. But his horror fiction is on level or better than Stephen King's. And it's all short stuff. And you can find it in a collection that Bain put out called Night and Demons. And for a long time, that book was my Bible on how to write horror because it's got his action stuff mixed with the horror elements in it. And if you like short story horror, you won't find better than Night and Demons by David Drake.
Nice. I'm gonna
Um,
have to look that up.
Trying to
Ye-
think if there's anybody else. Uh, I think I'm getting his name wrong. Martin Cruz Smith. He wrote Gorky Park, famous
Okay.
writer. Nightwing. That is a highly underrated novel. The movie's not fantastic, but Nightwing is a brilliant, brilliant novel. It's a vampire bat attack novel and with a lot of Native American culture, and it's just phenomenal.
Nightwing. I'm gonna have to check that one out too. And who is Nightwing by?
Again, I'm not sure if I'm getting his name right. It's Martin Cruz Smith or Martin Smith Cruz. I can't remember his name.
I'll just put
Uh,
Martin because that'll help me find it.
Very famous writer. He'll come up
Yeah.
immediately.
All right. So all three of these books that we discussed came out this year. Do you have any more books coming out before 2025?
Yes. The one I'm writing right now, Sasquatch Nightmare, should make it out before the end of the year.
Nice. I like
Um,
that title.
and, and then the other Bigfoot book that I'm waiting on the official contract for that's already been agreed upon. I can't tell you the title of that, but it'll probably be out sometime early next year.
Wow. That's so you're still pumping them out a lot. Like that would be like
I
5 or 6
try.
this year.
I try. Um, like I said, when I was younger, I would do 12 plus books a year, and now I'm lucky if I do 4 or 5. in a
Wow.
year. But, I mean, and my books are not huge books. They're like 80s style, thin novel, like David Ann's The Folly or Al Dempsey's Dog Kill. They're about that size, you know, or Mark Saunders' The Blot. You know, it's when people appreciated that shorter story that didn't have to be so literary with 80 billion pages of, you know, build up characters and stuff. It's just that fast adrenaline punch to the face kind of book.
Yeah. How after writing so many books, how do you still come up with ideas for new books? Like, I'm not saying where do you get your ideas from, but how do you mill in the idea? How do ideas continuously pummel you, or do you have to sit down and brainstorm?
Well, the honest answer is that I have to pay my bills, so I write to the market. So I
Okay.
have a publisher that I've worked with for probably around 15 years, and oftentimes they will go, "Hey, this is the kind of book we need," and I'll go, "Okay, well, here's a couple of directions we could go with that." They'll tell me which one. I send the contract, and I write the book. So it's not very often that I sit down. I've got this idea that's burning in me anymore. The last time that happened was Simex Incorporated, and
Mhm.
Cymex Incorporated and Bigfoot War, the original book, are probably the two most or the two best examples of me having my own idea and selling it instead of just working off, you know, a contract, kind of like a hack, I guess.
I
But
don't think that's like a hack at all, honestly. It's just, you doing your job, and, it's still very entertaining, so
But
it's
like I said,
working.
if I could right now, I would definitely do an 80s attack, 80s style animal attack novel. If someone would hire me for that, you know,
You're like,
that would be
"Please?"
what I would be up for.
Yeah.
So I probably sound like
That
I'm begging for work now. I'm not. Trust me, I have enough work. If someone would let me do that, I would definitely do it. So,
Yeah, just for your creative interests. Yeah, that's
and
awesome. Alright, so, I wanna thank you for coming on the show. That's, all the questions I have for now, but, you're definitely invited to come back on in the future, if you still wanna do that animal attacks here or, episode. But before we go, where can viewers and listeners find you online should they wish to catch your updates and maybe even talk with you a little bit?
well, I'm old and not very techy, so Facebook is the best place to find me. I just have an Eric S. Brown page on Facebook. Don't go to the fan page, go to my personal page. If you want any kind of real interaction, just send me a friend request or a message there. And just started talking about Brian Lumley. I'm going to end with a Brian Lumley kind of thing. Mark Powell, he was also in the Chud anthology, is a good friend of mine. He's written a lot of comics and stuff. And
Mhm.
I just did an interview with him about writing the Necroscope comics in the 90s. And that's going to come out in an upcoming issue of Christopher Fulbright's Realms of Night magazine. So if you like Necroscope stuff, that will be a cool little interview to check out over in Realms of Night.
Very awesome. Alright, well, thank you for coming, and, I can't wait to talk to you again, and, I wanna thank everyone in the future and everyone who showed up this morning to join us, and, we will catch you all again shortly.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, no problem.